videos about Sonora, Mexico, and southern Arizona for the last 12 years. He has posted nearly 300 educational videos about the flora, fauna, and cultural history of the region. Much of his early work was done with the Friends of the San Pedro River. Now he works as an interpretive person for the Friends of the Huachuca Mountains at Carr House Information Center. He is also currently doing video work for the Border Community Alliance in Tubac. He has done significant work for the Pinacate and Sierra Alamos Rio.
Rio Cochise.
Okay, reserves in Sonora, and his work also appears on the Coronado National Memorial Park web pages in the U.S. He has lived in Bisbee for the last 35 years, from where he launches his filming trips across the Southwest. So I'd like to all welcome Mike. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, hey everybody, thanks so much for coming. It's great to see a full house. It's wonderful. Yeah, this will be the first time I've done the beaver presentation. Normally I do a thing on the plants that are, little visitors from the south, the tropical plants. But this year they said, you've been doing so much work on the beaver, can you please do a presentation on the beaver? And I have a couple people here who I want to point out. One is the first guy that started helping me. We would go out and we'd be the only ones, Steve Anderson, right over here. Just wave, Steve. And then Steve Merkley here, who from Cochise, who later helped and started bringing the students. That was about 3 years ago? Yeah, 2 or 3. 2 or 3. And so I'm going to take this off. The theme of this, or one of the main things I want to get across, is just how this beaver survey has been gathering momentum across the years. And so I'll illustrate that, but I'm really glad to have started out with Steve, Marcia Radke, Steve Anderson, Marcia Radke, then Steve Merkley, and then Watershed Management Group from Tucson helped out. And the last, I'm going to end by showing a video about how the Mexican teams like ProFauna, ProNatura, CONAM, and some other Mexican environmental organizations got together, and we did the first binational beaver survey. And that'll illustrate just how this thing has been picking up steam. And then I'm also going to show you some of the things we use, some of the tools we use to figure out and record sign. So what I did, I'm going to sit down because I was rafting down the San Pedro and it was 850 cubic feet per second. And I spent most of the day trying to save my life and kind of messed up. And when I realized I was going to give this presentation, I thought, I don't have really good video of beaver in the San Pedro. And their numbers are pretty much down this year. So I wasn't able to get video of them. So I went up to the Black River in central Arizona by Alpine. And I set up a beaver blind and spent 4 days there. So what I'm going to let run in the background as much as I can are scenes that I took from the Black River, only a couple hundred miles north of here. So we can get familiar with their habits. So I was really lucky to get scenes. One thing I want to point out in here is, you see these rocks? Isn't that incredible? Well, let me get to the rocks later. I just wanted to point them out. So let me get to my PowerPoint. So I gave a trial run of this with a couple of people here that come to the Carr House. I'm the interpretive host at the Carr House, and please come up to the Carr House if you have anything you'd like to talk about. I sit around and talk to people all day about natural and cultural history. So we're only getting about 20 people a day. I'd like to have more, so please feel free to come up and spend as much time as you want talking. But the first time I tried this out at the Carr House, I forgot a few of the basics. And so we already talked about how the surveys are picking up momentum, but everyone doesn't know about some of the things they do. And so can somebody give me an idea of what you know about Beaver in terms of what are some of the things that stand out in terms of what they build? Dams.
And make ponds, right?
And they make the ponds. And so some of the other things that aren't real obvious is they build lodges, that they have water that's not running in a dammed up area. That's like a constant source of water. They build a dam in the middle, a lodge, not a dam, but a lodge. And they have entrances from underneath, and they come into those lodges and occupy those, and they're safe there. But here along the San Pedro, where we don't have those kinds of bodies of water, they build little bank lodges, as opposed to what I call a proper lodge. They build bank lodges, so they just burrow into the side. And the books all say that the entrances to the bank lodges are underneath the water for security. However, on the San Pedro, I noticed that a lot of them appear to be above water. And that might just be because the water level at the San Pedro fluctuates so much. But a lot of them I see nowadays are exposed, and that leaves the beavers vulnerable. But another thing that they build that I was really kind of amazed that I don't think a lot of people know about is they build canals. Did anybody know that?
No.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, let me show you some of the canals. The reason they build canals, so here's a canal that I'm going to start here at the back. So at first the canals are underwater, and they're probably from their bank lodges out to some of the vegetation they eat. And so this makes it easier in those shallow waters for them to transport the vegetation back to their lodges. And then as the water starts to dry out, they actually build up the banks more and keep more water in the channel and keep it deeper to get through periods of sparse water. And those are extensive. You know, when you think about dams and lodges, you know, dams can be pretty extensive, but these canals, my God, look at that. Look at how long. The first time I was out of the San Pedro, I was walking along, and maybe with you, Steve, and I saw this canal. I thought somebody must have come here with a shovel and, you know, made it. But later we realized it was the Beaver. And then the other big thing that I forgot to mention when I did it the first time was that beaver are keystone species and why they're so important. So they will build here's a great example. You see the moose there? This is in Silverton, Colorado, and this is the beaver's work. So where the water was before it dried up, the moose still come in, and there's a lot of whatever kind of willow they have up there. So this is attracting moose. It's attracting all kinds of waterfowl, amphibians, reptiles, and because they spread out the water and create more vegetation, and more insects come to the vegetation, and then other creatures eat the insects, we get the food chain into a more healthy state, and we get more species. So that's why the Bureau of Land Management teamed up with the Arizona Game and Fish back in 1999 to introduce eventually 16 beaver beginning in 1999 until 2002. After the 16 original ones were released, the numbers started to increase. And I used to work for the schools, and to blow off steam at the end of the week, I go out and I walk along the river all day long. And I was a member of the Friends of the San Pedro, and I got to know Marcia Radke, the biologist for the BLM. And so we'd talk, and she'd say, where have you seen any beaver dams? And so I'd keep a little list. And about that time, Steve started going out with me, and we'd go and make lists. And Steve had his Garmin, and he'd do this really good recording of where all the beaver dams were. That was very helpful back before we had the iPhone things. And so we'd plot maps and give them to Marcia, and she would calculate the number of beaver. And I believe, I'm quoting her correctly here, where she said, if you have, so the Sprinka, there's another thing I need to mention. The Sprinka is the San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, which was established in 1999 by the Bureau of Land Management from the Mexican border, US-Mexican border, up to St. David. And that's 45 miles. So in the 45 miles of the Sprinka is where we were starting to do our surveys. And so each mile can support 3 beaver. And so if you have 2 dams in 1 mile, that's still 3 beaver. And so the carrying capacity was around 150 beaver or 145 beaver for the Sprinka, according to that. So we would report these, and some of the dams looked like they'd made it through other years and didn't look all that active, but we reported them and we came up with the best estimate because we can't get out there and actually count the beavers. We don't put tags on them. We can't even get pictures of them. You know, they come out about dusk and they go in about dawn, so they're really hard to get pictures of. So their numbers, what we found between 2002 and the current day is that the beaver had gone up to about 150 at its highest point and down to, we think, about 10 this year. And so we're really concerned. And people always ask, what caused that? And we don't know. Nobody really has any definitive information on that. My thought is that mountain lions just keyed in on them. I know where to go to find beaver, and I think a smart mountain lion could maybe do this. So that's what I think. But you know, you could have water pollution, you could have people killing them. As a matter of fact, one of the unfortunate things was it Ziki that made a change and determined that the how does that go? That the state game and fish rules apply to federal property. Is that how it goes?
That's essentially that's what it came down to. But that, yeah, not exactly, but
something like that.
Yeah,
without a
all federal
longer.
properties were encouraged to abide by, you know, pretty much what game and fish wanted without any necessarily scientific reasoning behind it. And so that would be increasing hunting and trapping.
And so while on one hand, you know, the game and fish and the BLM decided to bring it back here because it was a keystone species and it would improve the environment, changes in the government happened and they kind of maybe went to the hunting side, and now people can come out and trap beaver. And so that could be why the numbers, you're welcome to write your senators or whoever, or state representatives about that.
Mike, when it floods, you know, through monsoon season, do they go upstream to the Gila? Have you?
Oh, well, we're going to be getting to that.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Okay.
So I see I have Steve and I used to do the first surveys and the numbers went down. Yeah, so I'm really concerned. This year, we only found one good dam in my mind. Do you agree, Steve? Yeah, 1 or 2 good dams. And one was really substantial. It was 75 feet long. And there could have been maybe as many as 8 beaver there. But I would guess.
There's at least one on my camera. So.
And Steve and Frank Emanuel from Cochise College put out cameras there. I'll show a picture of them a little bit later, of them putting out the cameras. Oh, and then we have an app nowadays. When Watershed Management Group, does anybody have an idea who they are? They're out of Tucson and they get money from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and other sources. Anyways, they came out with this thing. You probably can't see it, but it's ArcGIS Survey 123. And that was nice because then we could all, as we're going around, enter in the information here. And it says things like, was there scat present? Were there tracks? Were there slides? What kind of trees were they eating? You know, other observations, a little field that you could fill in. And so this is all going to one location, which really made the surveys a lot better than before, as opposed to us all turning in papers and somebody having to do that work. So you were asking about the beaver and you're traveling. And so Steve was thinking, and well, so let me back up. So this year we had the first Binational effort. So we went up to Cananea, and I'd heard, and I think Steve and I both heard, but had never witnessed it, that the beaver were more numerous up in Mexico than they were down here in Arizona. And so I had the opportunity to go with them and do the Mexican survey. And when we got up there, I saw that there were significant numbers. And I'm going to show a video about this at the very end, but what happens is that the river begins up in Mexico and Watershed, and there are a number of tributaries that come in just south of the border and then feed our main trunk of the San Pedro. So the beaver had gone up those tributaries, and at the top of the tributaries, there are reservoirs that ranchers had made. And these reservoirs are substantial. They're kind of like the reservoir of Parker Canyon Lake. You know, maybe some of you know Parker Canyon Lake, but it's a big body of water. So there are numerous big bodies of water up in the watershed of San Pedro River near the town of Cananea and Naco, kind of in that vicinity. And so it looks like the beaver have gone up into those lakes and have developed stable populations because those tributaries dry out for a good part of the year. So they seem to be safe in their little nurseries in these dammed areas. And I saw it firsthand. I don't think we had enough people to do an adequate count, but the theory that Steve has been talking about is that these beaver from those lakes would then, tell me if I'm doing this wrong, would then disperse later on when we have floods or wetter periods and come down and perhaps repopulate some of the beaver here.
It's possible they might have already done it, we don't know.
Yeah, and so that's what we're thinking, and that to me was just so cool that the beaver had, were released here and opportunistically went up and found these little bodies of water, and now they're kind of safe and waiting for a good time to return. Hopefully that proves out.
Hey, Mike, so what makes you think that they weren't always up there? Did the ranchers say historically they didn't see beavers, or
Well,
what?
I'm glad you asked that. So the beaver were extirpated from the San Pedro in 1905. At that time, there were ponds forming behind the beaver dams, and there was malaria. And so soldiers from Fort Huachuca, so the story goes, came down and blew up the dams and killed the beaver, which got rid of the malaria. But then the river became channelized. And so all these kind of like wet cienagas then began to wash out as cattle chewed so much of the vegetation. And when summer rains came, that sponge of the vegetation wasn't holding back the waters. And so lots of waters came through there and started scouring out the river. And so part of the idea with the Bureau of Land Management and the Game and Fish is that the beaver then come back in and start to hold back more organic vegetation, more water, start to recharge water. So I guess it's possible. I heard that the Mexican gray wolf populations, we got those from northern Sonora. So maybe there were some beaver we didn't know about, but the way the story goes is that the beaver were extirpated in 1905.
In Mexico?
Yeah, along the San Pedro. Yeah. Now there are other watersheds. I can't talk about other watersheds.
Mexico?
What?
Did the American soldiers go into Mexico?
Well, they should have. No, they shouldn't. Let's not get something started here, Dwight.
I'm just curious because the beaver could have retained their habitat in Mexico, but not in the United States.
Yeah, they could have.
Well, the managers down there didn't see any evidence of them for many years, just like up here. Then when we were introduced them in the US, they saw them come down there in like 2004. They got the first photos of them.
Well, that answers my question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to show the video at the end, but another thing that people don't realize is that these beaver dams get washed out every year. Like right about now, like about a month ago or so, we had some floods coming through here. And this graph shows how the beaver, I should make this larger, how the river goes. So this was just back here this July, and you can see the river normally is way down at a very minimal flow. This is at the Charleston Bridge. There's a gauge there, and there's just usually a trickle through there. But as you can see, as soon as the monsoons come here, we get these spikes. And what you want to do if you're rafting is like get it when it's right about here. So it stays it stays high all day because it goes down really quick, and then all of a sudden you have to carry your boat. So it is thrilling to be on the tip of a flood, but that washes out the beaver dams. And here's an example. This is the one that Steve and Frank Emanuel put the cameras on. It's 75 feet long. And then the other day when I was rafting just a few days ago, I took another picture of that. And as you can see, the flood totally wiped it out. There's no evidence of it. So those beaver are going to have to rebuild. What I've read is that the beaver can rebuild the dam in about 20 days. So what I expect to happen is after the big surges from the monsoons stop and the river kind of equalizes, that they'll begin to build dams again that will last. And another odd thing about our river is that after the monsoons, the leaves on the trees are still green. And so the evapotranspiration through the leaves is substantial, and the river may dry out after the monsoon. But then when the leaves fall in the fall, then it turns that spigot off and the water starts to creep back up. So the best time for beaver to have a more dependable source of water is after the leaves fall off and the flow starts to continue. And that goes on until spring when the leaves come back online. And it takes about a couple months, and then they start to drain the river again. But we need those trees. That's habitat for all kinds of birds, and it provides shade, and vegetation is one of the very best things for a watershed. Oops.
I have two questions on that. Where does beaver hang out while they're waiting for the river to get down?
Take it away, Steve.
Well, they could go up or downstream,
Oh, really?
or they could go to like a side channel. So these washes that are coming into the river, they could go into a side channel, hang out for a little bit, and wait for it to calm down, and then come back in the same area. Because we know that from previous data that they'll rebuild in the same spots, and some of them rebuild in the same spots every year. So.
And one of the things I've noticed too is that since I would walk the river a lot, the river dries out, but there's a place where like a big cottonwood falls over, and it leaves a deep depression. And since the water has dried out, it's still near the surface. It keeps those areas wet. And so I found this filthy pond where a tree had fallen over and a beaver was living in there. So they're tenacious. They'll cling on to whatever they can get. And then one of the other thoughts is that since they build these bank lodges, they could go back and estivate or kind of like hibernating in the summer back up into these little tunnels. And I've actually seen tunnels go back, what I believe is a tunnel because they have breather holes on them, go back 45 feet from the bank. So I think they have extensive tunnel systems under there that would be cool, and perhaps they could chew on roots or have a cache of food.
That's what they were doing here. So on that, we had he's showing us setting up cameras. We had cameras on this dam, and we noticed we had cameras on it about 2 weeks before the pond dried out and 2 weeks after. And right as the pond was drying out, we saw a lot of activity bringing back branches.
Oh, really?
So I'm guessing they were bringing them back to their bank lodge to hang out while it dried out.
Wow.
So they had a cache of food with them.
Wow.
Kind of cool.
Yeah.
My second question on that is, do we have enough vegetation along that to support the beaver?
Oh, there's plenty of beaver. So I'm going to give you a little list of things I've seen beaver eat. Bulrushes, cattails, Bermuda grass. I've seen them eat the Fremont cottonwood, the Gooding willow. I've seen them eat tamarisk. I've seen them eat emery oak. I've seen them eat juniper, ponderosa pine, Engelmann spruce, aspen. I've seen them eat all kinds of things you would never think.
Apple trees.
Apple tree.
Yeah.
Apple trees.
Yep.
So, and then I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I think the vegetation along the river is substantial enough that there's a good source of food for them there. We have the seep willows, the bockrus that grow right along the edges of the river, and they like that. That's always easy to get. And, you know, the young sprouts of the Gooding willows and the Fremont cottonwoods.
Well, I also meant as far as vegetation for them to rebuild the dam. Do they not cut trees or no?
So, yeah, I forgot to mention that part, and that's a real good question, because a lot of people don't know this one, that the beaver will chew a tree down and they're not eating the xylem, the hard part of the wood. They're knocking it down so they can get to the cambium layer, you know, that green layer that's on top of the wood. They knock the tree down to get to that. And when the tree comes down, then you have the tender little branches and shoots and leaves. So they eat the leaves, the buds, the cambium layer, and that wood that's left over, they use that to construct their dams. And another curious thing I might as well cover now is that when they start to build these dams, they push muck up and bring in rocks, carry rocks. And I don't know, I didn't understand that, you know, until I saw it. I was just amazed to see them actually using those kind of materials. And then they put the sticks on, and then they'll pack mud around that. So there's a fair bit that goes into dam building.
Do they have GPS? Their canals were so straight. You would have thought somebody came in with a.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why the first time I thought somebody had made it.
right.
So I have a question about the canals. Are those created as a consequence of just dragging things in the same place? Or do they like construct the canal first and then pull vegetation through?
I believe they construct them. Well, you know, that's a good question, but later on, when it dries out, you can clearly see that they've been pushing muck up.
Mhm.
So that wouldn't be dragging.
Amazing.
So just a few weird observations. When I was in Colorado, I just took a trip and I saw them going 300 feet uphill. And normally you think they're just going to stay in the water, but 300 feet uphill, 500 yards away to get some aspen. And then the other thing that I thought was really bizarre is that a lot of times when I'm out watching the beaver, I'll see something that I think looks like a little baby beaver. And I realized that it's a muskrat, because a muskrat swims faster and its tail wiggles more. And I thought, oh gosh, that's not a baby beaver. And then I realized it was going into the dens. And then I went in and I saw a video on YouTube or something about how beaver share dens with muskrats. And on the San Pedro, one of the weirdest things I saw was a tree. It was 9 feet high and it had been chewed on. And so here, when the water's levels high, you know, perhaps they could chew that high, but, or like if there's snow in the north and, you know, they get on top of the snow and they chew. You know, I saw a movie the other day and they were saying, well, how tall are these beaver, you know? And the guy says, well, they were on top of the snow. But on the San Pedro, I could see that they clearly climbed up 9 feet into a tree. I wish I had a picture of that. And so they rebuild the dams each year, and our big one on the San Pedro is 75 feet long and about 2 feet high. And so one of the things that they would always talk about on the San Pedro was that when these floods came, that the beaver would surf down the river. And I can't prove it, but I guess that would be a good method of transportation, you know, if you want to make a lot of distance. So they probably opportunistically will start to disperse. And at 2 years old is what I understand it, the mothers will start kicking out the kits to find their own territories. So, you know, maybe around monsoon time, they do use the floods to disperse. And then some of them get stuck in these dry areas. We rescued a beaver from the Benson area that ended up in under somebody's trailer. And so we brought it back to the Greyhawk Ranch and let it go. And so that it had walked like 1.5 miles away from the river to get there. And while I'm on that subject, we also have evidence of beaver having moved from the San Pedro watershed over to the Santa Cruz watershed. And I think that's 5 miles. So another weird thing you don't think about beaver, you know, walking across land. Just doesn't seem right.
How do they know where to go? There's the water there 5 miles away.
I don't know. You have any ideas?
My idea is they're following some sort of wash that's connecting neighboring watersheds. I don't know.
Yeah, probably a wash.
Some of them are just explorers, they'll just walk uphill and see what they can find.
Oh, and as far as the weird things we saw, you know, they were released and then they went into Mexico. Well, then they came back up in the United States at the base of the Huachucas. So there's a creek there, Bear Creek. And I was driving across it and I thought, my God, that looks like a tree that was knocked down by a beaver. And sure enough, I went over there with the chew marks. And so they've come up into Bear Creek and probably up further than that. So talk about opportunistic. And that's where I saw him chewing on the emery oak. And for those of us who have cut down emery oaks in our yard, we know that emery oak's some pretty darn tough wood. And I talked about them living in stagnant ponds. There's another pond right by the by the border that's really nasty. And a beaver has been hanging out there year after year. Every year I see the beaver there. It just looks like one beaver. I call those renegade beavers. They don't seem to have a family, but they just eke out an existence in tiny little desperate ponds. And so, you know, another thing I noticed on the San Pedro is that we'll see areas like in the survey, there were some areas that were, seemed to always have beaver. And then like this last year, one of those areas, we didn't find any beaver. And on the Black River, I've seen that too. And so you can't just think that beaver are dominant here and they're going to remain dominant. These huge dams I'd seen on the Black River, when I went back this year, were abandoned.
Has the border fencing affected them?
It's something I couldn't say. I don't really know. The border fence has gaps about 4 inches like that. And I'm often surprised at how flat an animal can make its body, but a beaver is generally from 40 to 60 pounds, maybe up to 100 for the bigger ones. So it seems like they'd be hard pressed to get through there. They're supposed to open up those gates when floods come through during the monsoons. So at that time, I suppose beaver could get through. But yeah, that's a good question. You know, maybe the beaver aren't getting through the way they used to.
Especially if there's debris that's washed up against it, making it a complete blockage. You know, 4 inches, I mean, a stick that's 6 inches then might not go through, right? You know, so imagine during these floods, a lot of debris is coming down through there.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I've seen some pictures of the floods coming through there and causing some damage. So, you know, people think, well, what, you know, we all might be in favor of beaver, but not everybody is. And so in agricultural canals along the Colorado River, you could easily have beaver. I've seen some there. And there was one creating a little wetland near the airport in Phoenix, which attracted birds, which were bad for the planes. And I think that's where we got one of our beaver from. And then I was just up at the Little Colorado, and they have this nice little trail system. And the beaver were making dams, which caused erosions, which were causing the trails to cave in. So they were trying to relocate the beaver. And then somebody finally confessed to me that they don't relocate all of them, they kill some of them. And of course, we're trying to get more beaver and get them relocated here, because I think you need to probably supplement reintroduction populations from time to time. So we'd like to, rather than let beaver die, and of course, we'd like to get pairs. They say it's much more successful if you bring a breeding pair, 2 compatible beaver, if you can do it, and bring them to the river so that they'll have kits. And then a lot of people in Arizona who are environmentalists don't like to see trees cut down. And I understand that. You know, it takes several years after a cottonwood has been totally girdled for it to die. But the idea is that, you know, the beaver build the dams and then the water level comes up and it goes out further away from the river. I think I have a graph on that somewhere. Go to that. So yeah, here's an example of how without beaver, the water starts to percolate down into the groundwater, and then the vegetation starts to die in flood conditions, and fires can jump across it. But when you have beaver, the water spreads out further. And so when you have droughts, there's more vegetation, and it's harder for the fire to skip over it, and you generally have more area recharging. But all this wood area could support trees. So even though they're cutting down trees, the greater wet areas, greater marsh areas they create would be good for some trees.
Do all beaver get along?
No, I've seen beaver, not be happy with each other. As a matter of fact, they have territories and they keep out other family units. So a family unit will maintain maybe a half-mile area and they'll keep other beavers away from there.
So when you get one to relocate it, you have to kind of know the other territory and put it somewhere outside that.
Well, we've never done, well, just that one in Benson. And we were just doing it to save its life. And then I think there was one other one up on the Verity or somewhere.
Yeah, they brought that. I think the idea is that if they face that conflict, they'll keep moving down or upstream away.
They'll move.
The beaver will move on their own. They don't like fight to the death or anything.
And then I heard that ranchers don't like them. I couldn't figure that one out. Anyways, yeah, I was just in Michigan and in Minnesota and, where the water's abundant. And I never realized this, things occur to me slowly, but the lakes that we have in Michigan aren't really completely natural. They've built up dams and spillways, and then we try to maintain the water levels. And so the beaver don't, when they hear, they're stimulated by the sound of flowing water. So when they come to these little areas that water flows over, they try to plug them up. And so that really confounds the game and fish people. People are the land managers, the state parks. So that's an issue there. Yeah, and then I found out when I was in Michigan just recently that hunting isn't profitable anymore because of the virus, the COVID, that they don't have these shows where everybody brings in their pelts and sells them. And so they're not selling as many pelts, and then they're starting to build up pelts. So pelts are very common nowadays. And they told me in Michigan that it's not worth hunters' efforts anymore to go out and hunt the beaver. You spend more money on gas than you do getting it. But then I read this thing about the castor glands. I guess those are used in the production of perfume, and that those were going for $100 a pound. And so in this article, they were trying to encourage people to kill beaver, and that's where the castor gland is. I've read some things that were confusing where they said it was the same as the anal gland. It isn't. It's near there. So you can see in this diagram where the castor gland is, and then you can see how they remove them. But apparently that's valuable stuff.
Careful. Unfortunately, they have to kill the animal, huh?
Yeah, they have to kill the animal. Yeah. And in Colorado, there are all these roads that usually follow streams because it's so hilly. And then the Beaver build dam. And so I've seen them having to dredge those areas and knock down the dams. Oh, and then into fish hatchery. So one of the things they have in the east is this thing called the Beaver deceiver. And I think hopefully I have that here somewhere.
Prevent the sound of flowing water or flowing water.
Yeah. I think I know where that's at. So there was a fish hatchery in Colorado, and the beaver were plugging it up, and right in into that. Oh, here it is. Here's the Beaver deceiver. Play and stop it. So they plug up the area where the sound of the water rushing is, and they put a fence around it, but they put a long pipe, and as you can see, they cover that pipe up so the beaver don't try to clog that up. And so the water comes in here, goes through there, and goes out, and that way you can maintain a level. And we never have to do anything like that here that I'm aware of, at least in this part of the state. But those are some of the problems that beaver cause. And here in Colorado, you can see this beautiful valley there by Springerville, where the beaver created a dam that's going across the road. And then in Minnesota here, somebody had made a road to their property. And as you can see, the beaver came in and built. They were probably unhappy about that. And they had a little steam shovel there to plow it away. And then here in Michigan, you can see it, another place. This was a lake on a state park. And you can see here, this was their wall to control the water level, and the beavers coming in the day and plugging it up. They're very active, as busy as a beaver. Yeah, if we talked about them rolling rocks up for the foundation. So I'm going to go back to the video so we can just watch the beaver and talk about it. So we were talking about dam construction, and I was pointing out the rocks here. And I'll show you pictures later on of them actually, carrying rocks and muck up to make these dams.
Looks like a good skipping rock.
And the other thing I noticed is that they, so here's a little section on eating. So I had set up the blind here. See these logs in the back? I made a little blind back there so the beaver couldn't see me, but still my head was sticking up. And so the next scene you're going to see is from that blind, and a little beaver, a little kid, swam up to me. Here he is right here. He was from me to you, Steve. And I could swear he was looking at me. Here in a minute, you'll see him looking right at me, my head's sticking up. So either their sight isn't very good, or they don't get that excited if you don't move quickly. And actually other places I've been even closer to beaver than that, and they don't seem to react too much. But they will come out in the morning. They come out. Let me go to a section called slapping, if I can find that. Oh, let's go to food caching while we're here. So as Steve was saying, he saw on the camera beaver bringing back twigs and branches with leaves on them and disappearing into the hole. And so they must have some kind of chamber in there where they're caching all this food to get through the dry periods. And this is examples of them pulling some of that debris or some of those twigs. You see this guy with this branch, this guy's biting it in two, and then pretty soon he'll carry it. I think that's the mother actually, and she'll be taking it back. And then you'll see the baby coming after her, I think.
Mike, do they make sounds? Do they make any kind of sound?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Yeah. So when we'll see here on the bank, I had come out on the bank to go and film right where we're looking here, and they pile up branches over top of their bank lodges. So as I was walking by those before dusk, you could hear the beaver in there. And here he goes. He's gonna, or she, watch her dive down, and she's going up that little hole there to cache that food. So when I would walk by these areas, you could hear a mewing sound, and it sounds something like this. And you can hear numerous ones in there. And it's just a really endearing sound. You know, it almost sounds like a puppy or something, and makes you really want to fall in love with the beavers, you know.
Are they afraid of you?
I'm sorry.
Are they afraid of humans that you come there, or do they?
Well, I've always wondered, you see the baby attacking the, I don't know, because like I said, I get very close to them, and what happens is at dusk, right about dusk, they'll come out, and one will come into the water generally, swim around surveying the whole pond, you know, as if to look around to make sure there's no danger there. And then it might just slap its tail. And the best I can tell is just doing it for the heck of it, you know, maybe to say, let's get the party started, you know, because I don't think they see me, you know, because I'm very still and I trade it stay concealed. So he comes out and just slaps his tail to maybe get things started. And then it might come out and it might slap its tail several more times. And then other beaver will come out and start to join it. And then they all go about their business. But there are other times when I've seen them where they seem to see me and then they slap their tails, but then they pop right back up again. And I've been in a kayak and in Minnesota, and I'm out there paddling around and the beaver will come up like they're angry. They'll look at you and they'll slap their tail. Then they'll go to the other side and they'll slap their tail. So I don't think they're particularly intimidated. Have you seen them, Brenda, in the Colorado?
Yeah, I've not watched them and then hidden and see them slap their tails. My only experience with them slapping their tails was spent a lot of time on kayak in Colorado River backwaters and to do some bird surveys. Had to be out there in the dark, scared the heebie-jeebies out of me, in the dark, you're in a kayak just sitting still and all of a sudden right beside you, you get sprayed a tail slap and it's like, and then you realize, oh, it's just a beaver, it's okay. But I always thought that it was their kind of way of telling me, get out of here, slap the tail and go, and then they will come up somewhere else later. But yeah, I just always felt like they were just saying, go away.
I think they're brave in the water.
They're certainly braver in the water, yeah, because that's their only escape from a predator is water.
Mhm.
And, I think when we were talking about their decline in the San Pedro, I mean, yeah, certainly not mine, but I think any predator, all those predators, coyotes, bobcat, they're all really smart because they have to be in order to live. And I think that, I don't know, because I just moved out this way a year ago, but I know last year there were monsoons, but in previous years, like most rivers have been drying, right? There's been drought. So if they're very territorial and a family group has this one little pond and others have to move, they have to find somewhere else, then while they're finding someplace else, if they're on dry land or if they're even in shallow water, we know that bobcats, coyotes, they'll go in shallow water to get anything. I think that they're just really vulnerable if the water isn't deep enough. So maybe part of the big picture would be potentially drought and drying of the river.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you're right that that just leaves them so vulnerable.
Because they really have it's not like they can, bite or claw or, they're pretty vulnerable.
So do they flee or do they stand and fight?
I've never seen them in a
seen them.
conflict. Have you?
So I saw a video of a mountain lion attacking a beaver and the beaver was fighting back and got the mountain lion to leave. But there was water around too. So it was able to leave, but it fought. So, but I think they would try to find refuge if they have a bank lodge somewhere. That's where they would go. But yeah, if a predator keyed on them where the bank lodge, if it was open, exposed, they might be able to get them there too.
Yeah. And if I didn't mention it, that's why they build dams is to keep a water environment because that's where they're the safest when they're in the water.
And those deeper canals that they built, it looked like the water was pretty shallow and then they built this deeper canal where they would be safe in that deeper canal, right?
Yeah.
Versus up in that shallow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to show.
I think we have a question.
Oh yeah.
Were the original beavers here a distinct subspecies?
What have you heard anything about whether they?
Yeah, I think the original ones back before they were extirpated were like the local Sonoran subspecies. And then the one that they reintroduced was just the one from northern
Reintroduced
Arizona.
ones aren't as used to this habitat as we would.
Yeah, it's possible. They tried to get it close. It's from the Salt River in Phoenix and Verde and stuff in northern Arizona. So, but yeah, that's a possibility. We thought about, because I have a colleague that wants to do genetics on them, just to see if there wasn't, that subspecies still around. Because there's other places in Mexico where there still have been beaver that weren't reintroduced. So compare them to what we have.
Yes.
How many are in the river?
How many are where?
In the river?
Oh, I think they said from anywhere from 2 to 8. Is that what you've heard? I think 2 to 8.
And does that depend on food probably?
I think I read that. Did you read that too?
That it depends on food.
On the amount of available
Yeah,
food, yeah.
amount available, yeah.
Makes sense to me, but I'm not sure. It probably depends on how much food the mother had got beforehand. How much
Yeah.
energy she invested in it.
So if anybody ever wants to be part of the survey, I'm going to get the little training video that we have here. Let's see. So I made this for Watershed Management Group when they started, or maybe I made it for your students, I can't remember.
Nature concerns.
Nature Conservancy.
So,
And then the Nature Conservancy's gotten involved. So, you know, there's all this momentum, you know. Since they do a wet dry measurement every June. So they walk the 45 miles of the spring cut and record where the river is above ground and where it's below ground. And we asked them if they wouldn't mind sharing their observations about beaver. So we have a snapshot in time in June as well as in November when we do it. And the reason we do it in November is because, as I was saying, the leaves are off the tree, the water's more stable, they have a chance to start building their dams, and the snakes are less active. So that's a really good time in November to get started. The water's cold, but in any case, this is how we do it. Obvious things, you know, like bring a change of clothing because we stay in the water a lot of the time. Somebody spends almost all the time in the water, and you be prepared for an emergency. And so we want people on both sides of the bank. So now since it's not just me and Steve, we have usually teams of 5, 2 people on one side, 2 people on another side, and maybe somebody going down the middle, depending on how the middle is. And if you get tired by the end of the day, I mean, people get fatigued and you just stop watching. So I ask people to record if they get tired or if they leave the river because there's a bunch of bushwhacking. Ask them to record that so we can go back and do a better survey. And then of course have a cell phone and take pictures and use the ArcGIS. And we do have a designated person. So this was your group, wasn't it?
yeah, it was one of my groups back in 2020.
Yeah, walking right up the middle of the river, and I think they enjoyed it. And as you can see, the river's not very deep.
There's other areas you can't do that because it's above your head.
Yeah, we've had a couple of people fall in and
Yeah.
You have preferred shoes to use on these river walks?
I wear these sandals all year round. And these are great because the stuff can go out, you know, the gravel gets in and then it can go out. What do you like, Steve?
Yeah, I have similar to that, except not closed toed. They're Tivas. They just easy for walking in the river. Easy to do what I do.
Yeah, I really like
It depends on the stretch. If I know I'm not going to be in the river, I don't wear hiking boots because this stuff it gets real high and scratchy on your feet. Long pants and hiking boots.
I have one picture of another instructor, Frank Emmanuel. The grass is way over his head, and you see a little head down there. Some of the stretches are just absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
Like just north of Hereford Road is miserable. You're going less than a quarter mile an hour when you're walking because there are log jams in there. There's tall grass. Just can't see where you're putting your feet. The grass is so thick, it's hard to get through. And then I ended up with this group. And usually I'm out there by myself and have 4 young women. I couldn't believe the things they talked about. My goodness. Yeah, so you always have to remember that even though the river's dry, you can still have beaver. So you don't just want to whiz over these areas that are dry. And so maybe this is the most useful one. So here's the river bottom. Here's the dam level, which should be the same. Hopefully it's the same as the water level. And of course we record the dams, which is the most important thing that Marcia was using to base her calculations on, but we monitor all these things. So one of the things we're looking for in water mostly are sticks. And I'll show you pictures of sticks and how you can tell whether they're new or old. It's because if you see a recently chewed stick, that indicates that there's beaver there now. And then the bank lodges and the chewing on the sides of the trees. So those are the main thing. And then there are slides where the beaver come in and out the same place everywhere, and they drag their tail and it makes this nice looking slide. Scat and tracks, things like that. And here are the tracks, and there's a slide. And so some of the cache they take into the lodge, as Steve has pictures of. And then other ones, when there's enough water, they just leave them right out in the middle of the river. And then maybe go out there in the middle of the night and snack on them. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a winter thing, when there's not as many leaves in the winter, they'll just put it underwater. They'll topple the tree and the whole tree will fall in.
Yeah, so unlike other animals, these animals have plans. Do construction and they have plans. So it's hard to tell when you're first doing it what's recent and what's not. But yellow is recent and gray is from another year. And so I'll show, I have pictures in here to let people see firsthand. So here's a dam that, this one doesn't look all that active to me, but at least the water's up to the top. But I don't see a lot of recent herbivory or chewing on the branches there. So I kind of debate when I look at that to think whether it's active, but I would go to the active side on that dam. And then here's one that you can see it's been breached, and who's this guy? And the water running over it, so they're not maintaining that one so much.
Guy with a stick probably breached it.
Did you? So here's a really good example of a fresh stick. And if you look, if you run your finger right across this part, you can feel the grooves of beaver teeth. So I would say that was within the last month or two. And then here's an older one that obviously has been chewed, but the color is yellow. And then here's one that's even older. So we show this so that people can know what to record. And here's the bank lodge. So as I said, most of the literature says the bank lodges or entrances are underneath the water. On the San Pedro, I notice most of them seem to be above water. But as I said, that could be because the water fluctuates. But there, a beaver would come through here and go up into the bank lodge. And here's some old herbivory, them girdling some really big cottonwoods. So on one hand, you think they're smart, and on the other hand, you look at that and you're thinking, how could they ever think they're going to get through that tree and knock it down? So that's old activity, yeah.
Those dead trees then?
No, actually, they were still alive.
Okay.
Yeah, what I've noticed is that it takes a couple years for the, even though it girdles the xylem, which carries the moisture, but still it takes, I girdle the, the cambium. I guess the xylem still has enough osmosis going on that it supplies the cambium. So it takes 2, maybe even more years for the tree to die. There's a very old one. There's another old one, and you can see the tracks. They're not always like you see in the pictures, but you can see some tracks here, right there, some scratches. And there's some fresh stuff. So if I see that, I'm thinking I need to really pay attention and look for bank lodges and other signs. And there we were, Steve was recording the location on his Garmin. Oh, and then there's this one log jam up by Hunter Wash, just a horrible log jam. And I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but the debris gets caught up in their junk that's floating down the river. On one hand, the reason I think it's fortunate because a lot of times that debris doesn't come the rest of the way down on the river, but then it looks like this, and it looks like almost like a junkyard. Yeah, there's been a huge log jam up by Hunter Wash for a long time, and that's very difficult to walk through. And beaver can live underneath there, so you have to look closely when you're traveling through those areas. And they also want us, the BLM wanted us to mark illegal hunting stands. they can put out stands, but they're supposed to take them down within a certain period of time. And so we just record them and they can determine how long they've been up, but you're not supposed to leave them up indefinitely. Yeah, so I'm just talking about how our numbers have been going down. And here's the one we got from Benson and brought down. Really cute looking little beaver. And we lost track of it. But as you were saying, when a beaver gets into new territory, they're more vulnerable. And my guess is just that it got picked off by somebody, by a mountain lion, whatever, coyote, bobcat. And so here's our watershed. Here's the internet. How are we doing for time?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
You're at 2 o'clock right now, but we have till 15 for everybody to clear the room.
Okay, did you have a question? Oh. Anyways, this is well, let me show a video. I just want to show the first international beaver survey. So let me show that since we're near the end here. So this is a little video I made of the teams down in Mexico. Hopefully we have audio here. Doesn't look like it. We're here on the San Pedro River, and this is a binational effort.
Es un esfuerzo binacional en el río San Pedro.
With much amistad, with much friendship, we're monitoring the beavers. Can you hear it?
De monitorear los castores. Esto es un esfuerzo binacional y mucha amistad entre los dos países.
Today was a great day. Today was the last day of the first binational beaver survey along the San Pedro River of southeastern Arizona and northern Sonora, Mexico. In 1905, beaver were extirpated along the San Pedro River, and it wasn't until 1999 that beaver were restored to the river by the Arizona Game and Fish Department on the Bureau of Land Management San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, which stretches from the international border all the way up to the town of St. David. The beaver numbers began to increase. At one time, we think the beaver populations were over 100 from the initial 16 that were released. But then what happened in recent years is we've had some droughts, and the number of beaver